Closed rainforest, endless green. That sound of life that feels like it's coming from every direction at the same time. Now cut to a place where the ground turns into waves, white dunes, blown out light, and in the middle of it, freshwater lagoons, as if someone had poured liquid sky between the sand. And finally, a roar. Giant waterfalls, water crashing down in multiple drops at the same time, mist on your face, rainbows appearing out of nowhere. Three settings that look like they belong to three different countries, but they don't. It's Brazil. And that's why I like to say Brazil is a continent disguised as a country. Here, the map isn't just a pretty drawing. It's a machine that produces difference. The landscape changes, the climate changes, the way people live changes, even what people consider normal changes. Today you're going to understand how geography wrote Brazil's history, because before there were highways, before there were cities, before there was any idea of a border, there were already rivers deciding where you can go. There were already mountain ranges saying where it's hard to pass. There were already forests protecting and hiding. There were already open plains inviting movement. The territory didn't sit around waiting for history to happen. It pushed history in the direction that was possible. And that explains a lot of things that, from far away, seem mysterious. Why the coast became the gateway and the interior became the challenge. Why some regions connect fast while others seem to grow like islands, each with its own rhythm. Why you can travel just a few hundred miles and Brazil already changes color, smell, temperature, and landscape, as if you'd changed the channel. Brazil is big, yes, but what's most impressive isn't just the size, it's the variety. It's the feeling that you're traveling through several different worlds fitted into the same territory, like a puzzle made by someone with way too much creativity. And now comes the most interesting part. There's a detail on Brazil's map that changes everything. An invisible line that separates experiences, routes, and possibilities. And when you see that detail, you start to understand why history here followed different rules depending on which side you were on. Before we go into any specific landscape, we need to do one simple thing. Open the map and look Brazil in the face as it really is. Not as a country, but as a territory so large it works almost like its own world inside South America. When you measure the internal distances, you realize a lot of people live in completely different realities without ever crossing paths with each other. And that's where the idea of a Brazil of many Brazils comes from. It's not just cultural diversity, it's diversity of ground, of climate, of rivers, of terrain. The country touches the equator and stretches down to near the Tropic of Capricorn. So the same flag covers environments that change as if you'd switched emotional hemispheres. Now look at the shape of the territory. Brazil opens up to the Atlantic Ocean with an enormous coastline. And that isn't a detail, it's destiny. The coast is a door. It's where arriving is easier, where contact with the world happens first, where cities grow early because access is direct. The interior, though, the interior is an endurance test. It's distance, it's shifting terrain, it's a route that has to be discovered. For a long time, the interior wasn't far only on the map, it was far in real life. And when something is hard to reach, it develops a different rhythm, different routes, different solutions. It's like the coast tells its story out loud, and the interior writes its own story more slowly, but in its own way. And here comes the video's golden rule, so you never see geography as just scenery again. Where there's terrain, rivers, and climate, there's history. Mountains become barriers or shelter. Rivers become highways or borders. Climate decides what grows, what's scarce, and how people adapt. Brazil's history didn't happen on top of the map. It happened because the map made certain things possible and made other things harder. So whenever you see a Brazilian landscape, ask, what does this place allow people to do, and what does it prevent? Because the answer almost always explains the next chapter. If Brazil were a movie, the biomes would be the main characters, and each one steps on screen with its own personality, the kind that changes the story just by showing up. It starts with the Amazon. It's not just a big forest. It's a living system that creates humidity, pulls in clouds, and sends rain back out like breathing. The detail most people don't picture is this. Part of what falls from the sky there doesn't come from far away. The forest itself helps produce that cycle, recycling water non-stop. It's like the landscape has a recharge the climate button. Then you head south and enter the Cerrado, which a lot of people glance at and underestimate. But it's the biome of the underground secret. Plants here usually have deep roots, adapted to a world of drought and natural fire. And here's the surprise. This ground works like a giant water tank, feeding springs and major river basins. On the surface, it looks simple. Underneath, it's nature's engineering. And then the camera cuts to the Caatinga, the land of, it looks dead, but it isn't. In the dry season, a lot of things lose their leaves. The landscape turns pale, thorny, quiet. Until the rain arrives and the biome changes fast, like someone flipped on the lights. And the most important fact, it's the only biome found exclusively in Brazil, a world that exists only here, with species that learn to survive where almost nobody would bet they could. On the coast, the Atlantic forest comes in like that character that used to be huge and now shows up in pieces, but still steals the scene. Even heavily fragmented, it remains one of the richest regions in biodiversity and endemism, with plants and animals that don't exist anywhere else. The surprise here is this: a broken biome can still be one of the most complex on the planet, like a precious mosaic that keeps fighting to breathe in the middle of cities and mountain ranges. When you think you've already seen everything, the Pantanal shows up, the biome that changes its face with the waters. It isn't always flooded or always dry, it pulses. In certain seasons, huge areas turn into a mirror of water. In others, they turn into open fields. And the detail that sounds like a movie script is that this back and forth turns the place into a perfect stage for wildlife, concentrating animals and birds at unbelievable levels, like nature set a meeting with a date and time. And down in the south, the Pampa appears, which a lot of people summarize as grassland and miss the whole point. But the Pampa is more than grass. It has enormous diversity of plants, wetlands, gallery forests, and a landscape rhythm that shifts with wind, rain, and temperature. The surprise is exactly that. The simple there is sophisticated, a biome of open horizons, but full of details hidden in the ground. Now put all of that together with the climate, and you understand why Brazil lives in many calendars. There are places where the year isn't divided into 4 neat seasons, but into rainy season and dry season. In other areas, cold fronts move down and bring a real winter, with a cold morning and even frost. And in the middle of all that, there are regions where the heat is constant, but the difference is in the sky. It rains a lot, it rains a little, it rains suddenly, it rains for weeks. It's like each part of the country follows its own weather clock, and that changes everything. What grows, how houses are built, how trips are planned, how day-to-day life works. And now think about that applied to migrations, routes, and cities. Because when the ground changes, the path changes with it. And where the path goes, history usually stops to live. If you took Brazil's map and turned it into 3D, with mountains popping up and valleys sinking down, you'd notice something right away. The terrain is a silent screenwriter. It doesn't show up in the books as a character, but it decides where history can actually move. Because a mountain isn't just a mountain. It's a wall. It's a detour. It's a delay. It's protection. And in Brazil, some walls are so striking they work like real invisible barriers. Think about the Serra do Mar, which runs along a big part of the coast like a giant step between the coastal strip and the interior. On paper, it looks simple to cross. In real life, for a long time, it was like trying to get into a house through a second-floor window. That pushes routes toward a few crossing points, natural bottlenecks, valleys, cuts through the mountains. And when everyone has to pass through the same places, those places become historical crossroads. And it isn't just the Serra do Mar. The Serra da Mantiqueira also enters this story as a line of resistance in the landscape. It creates natural divisions, changes the climate within just a few miles, and forces routes to go around, climb, descend, always negotiating with the landscape, never ordering it around. Now swing the camera toward the interior and you'll find the Central Plateau, a vast highland with long horizons and rivers being born in multiple directions. This kind of terrain isn't a barrier like a mountain range, but it's a different kind of challenge. Distance, elevation, shifts in climate and vegetation. It's the kind of place that tests persistence. And that helps explain why some regions stayed isolated for centuries. It's not just far, it's far with difficult terrain, with routes that aren't obvious, with crossings that depend on knowing the right way. And that's where the rivers come in as lines that stitch the country together. A classic example is the São Francisco River. It isn't just water flowing, it's direction, reference, a route axis, a kind of natural arrow pointing to where you can move forward with less resistance. In the end, what decides settlement and routes isn't will, it's possibility. Old cities show up where the terrain allows you to stop, on defensible hills, at confluences, near passages. And when you see these invisible walls, you understand something essential. Before any road, Brazil already had trails, drawn by the ground itself. And then comes the question that pulls the next chapter forward. Who was it that learned to read this terrain first, without a map, without a compass, without GPS? Before 1500, Brazil wasn't an empty place waiting for someone to arrive. It was a living puzzle, full of people, roots, languages, and its own rules. Truly complex, the kind you only understand when you stop looking at the map as territory and start looking at it as home. Think about the scale of it. Thousands of communities spread across rivers, forests, grasslands, mountain ranges, and coastline, each with its own way of building, planting, hunting, fishing, celebrating, and protecting itself. And not everyone was the same. There were alliances, rivalries, exchanges, migrations. There was politics in the most human sense of the word, living together, deciding, negotiating, fighting, but all of it tied to the environment. Along the great rivers, the water was a road, a calendar, and a marketplace at the same time. The river told you when the fish run upstream, when the flood changes everything, where you can stop, where you can cross. A canoe was the car and the river was the GPS, except instead of a robotic voice saying, "turn right," it was the current, the wind, and collective memory saying, "this way works." In the forest, knowledge was microscopic. A plant that heals, a plant that kills, fruit that feeds you, wood that works for a house, fiber that becomes a hammock, resin that turns into glue, and more. Many people managed the landscape, opening clearings, using explanatory fire, controlled with a purpose, to renew areas, draw in game, and make routes easier. The forest wasn't just untouched nature, it was also a lived-in place, read, cared for, reshaped with skill. In the grasslands and savannas, the game changed. Open space, long sightlines, faster movement, different strategies for hunting and housing. In the semi-arid region, life taught the basics: store, ration, know the right season, read the sky and the soil like you're reading a book. Along the coast, the sea and the mangroves became a pantry. Fish, shellfish, salt, coastal routes, meeting points. There are places where the landscape itself keeps that memory in ancient piles of shells and leftovers of life, as if they were time's shelves. And then comes the most fascinating part. There were maps. They just weren't on paper. They were in the trails, in place names, in stories told around the fire, in the signs of the wind, in the stars, in the sound of a specific bird signaling water nearby. The territory was known through experience and through passing it on, from generation to generation, but with the precision of people who depend on that knowledge to live. And once you understand that, arriving by sea carries a different weight, because the New World wasn't new. It was a world that was already running. And the coastline, which we'll look at in the next chapter, wasn't just a pretty line, it was a door. And doors change everything when someone walks through them. The beginning of Brazil's history, the way we know it, comes in by sea. And that isn't poetry, it's pure geography. When you arrive at a continent by ship, you don't choose just anywhere to stop. You look for shelter, fresh water, terrain where you can anchor, land, and get your bearings. So Brazil's coast becomes the first page because it's the most accessible page. Think of the coast as a long door, mile after mile of edge, but with specific locks. Not every stretch of beach becomes an entry point. What draws a constant human presence are the places where the coast offers an advantage. Bays that protect you from the open sea, coves that hide vessels, estuaries where the river meets the ocean, and coastal rivers that work like natural corridors into the interior, even if only for certain stretches. That's where the map starts to light up. You look at the coastline, and suddenly, certain points shine brighter. A deep bay here, a river mouth there, a natural harbor farther ahead. As if someone were turning on lights along the coast, forming a network. Not an internet network, an access network. And when those lights come on, the first urban centers are born. Not because someone declared, it's going to be here, but because the place makes life easier. Salvador, for example, fits into a setting of shelter and natural control thanks to the Bay of All Saints. Calm water, carved out shoreline, a protected entrance. It's the kind of geography that invites permanence. Farther south, Rio de Janeiro rests on one of the most striking natural stages on the coast, Guanabara Bay, a bay that looks like it was made to shelter ships, with shores that become points of observation and circulation. Terrain and water working together, protection and passage in the same package. In the northeast, the coast creates its own magnets too. Recife grows on a shoreline cut by rivers and by a natural feature that always drew attention. Reefs that help break the force of the waves and outline calmer areas near the coast. The result is a space that favors stops, meetings, connections. And before all of that takes on the face of a city, São Vicente shows up as one of those early points where geography allows the first solid step. An accessible coast, land you can settle, routes that can be tested. So the coast isn't just the backdrop of the beginning, it's the mechanism of the beginning. It was through it that the world came in, and it was through it that Brazil began to be redrawn. And from the moment those coastal lights connect, an inevitable question is born. How does this story leave the edge and truly try to cross the country from the inside? After the coast lights up, comes the question that gives you chills. How do you actually get into a territory this big? Because Brazil's interior, for centuries, wasn't right over there. It was a world of distance, heat, thick forest, endless fields, mountain ranges cutting across the way like locked doors. It was the kind of place where a paper map doesn't mean much, and your body learns fast. The push inland doesn't happen in a straight line. It happens along the possible route. And possible here means something very practical, where you can get through without being swallowed by the landscape. The interior was a physical challenge before it was anything else. The sun beat down. Water could disappear. Food depended on knowing how to read the environment. And the terrain played that cruel game of, it looks close on the map, but try climbing it and see. Valleys became natural corridors. Passes between mountain ranges became contested points. And any route that worked started getting repeated, marked, remembered. And that's where the rivers come in, Brazil's true ancient tracks. Because without roads, a river is direction. It pulls you, guides you, gives you reference points. A big river is like an arrow drawn on the ground saying, "Go this way and you'll get somewhere." In the Amazon, for example, the Amazon River isn't just a river. It's a system of routes with branches, channels, and shortcuts that turn the forest into a navigable labyrinth. In other regions, the São Francisco River works like an axis, like a lifeline crossing different environments, connecting people, stopping points, trade, and shared stories and survival skills. But a river is also a trap. It takes you, but it can hold you. There can be a stretch of rapids that turns into a wall of water. There can be a flood that changes everything and erases the bank. There can be a bend that tricks you and makes you lose hours, days. There can be animals, disease, mud, vegetation closing off the passage. Sometimes the river promises a route and delivers a test. And anyone who doesn't understand the rhythm of the water ends up at its mercy. The expeditions that pushed inland learned that firsthand. It isn't humans who control the route. It's the terrain. It's the climate. It's the season. It's the river level. It's the mountain range that forces you to go around. It's the plain that invites you to keep going. And when we understand that push, one thing becomes clear. Geography didn't just guide routes. It created different cultures. Because people who live by following rivers see the world one way. People who live by overcoming mountain ranges, another. People who live out in the open fields, another. And that's where the Brazil of many Brazils stops being a pretty phrase and becomes a consequence of the ground. And in the next chapter, we'll see how those routes became cities, and how some cities were born exactly where the landscape said, "This is where you can stop." Some cities are like fossils. You walk through them and feel layers of time beneath the asphalt, in the curves of the streets, in the way the landscape forces the city to be the way it is. In Brazil, that's even clearer because many cities were born where geography said, if you want to stay, it's here. Start with Salvador. It's the face of an Atlantic gateway, not only because it faces the ocean, but because it was built in a place that makes arrival, shelter, and connection easier. The unexpected detail is physical, almost theatrical. The city is born on two levels. There's the upper part up top, and the lower part right by the sea. It looks like just pretty scenery until you realize it becomes an urban engine. Going up and down there is everyday life, and for centuries, that shaped circulation, meeting points, and ways of occupying space. It's as if the city itself were a giant staircase, and history was forced to climb it. Now cut to the interior and step into Ouro Preto, a city that looks like it was carved into a hillside. Here, the terrain isn't background, it's the architect. The surprising detail is how the slope becomes a language. The streets go up and down without asking permission, and that creates a different mental map. You learn the city by highs and lows, by curves, by viewpoints. Even water becomes a character, because on steep ground, rain isn't just rain, it's force. The city had to be born understanding drainage, routes, where, and the choice of where to build. In the Serra do Espinhaço, the landscape won't let you forget. Every corner is proof that the ground is in charge. And then comes Rio de Janeiro, which is practically a geographic symbol before it's a city. Here, history fits into a setting that feels almost over the top. Mountains rising out of nowhere, rocky cliffs, beaches, and a bay that works like a natural stage. The unexpected detail is that Rio doesn't spread out easily like a city on flat land. It fits itself in. Geography creates corridors, separates areas with hills, pushes growth in certain directions, and turns the landscape into a constant reference. It's the kind of place where the map becomes identity. You don't just say, "I'm going downtown." You say, "I'm going past the hill. I'm going along the shoreline. I'm going around." The city is a beautiful maze drawn by stone and water. In the end, these cities prove one thing. In Brazil, history isn't only in books. It's in the terrain, in the climbs, in the cuts of the coastline, in the choices the territory imposed. And when you learn to read a city like that, you start seeing the entire country as a living archive, written by the ground. When we say there are many Brazils, it isn't just a figure of speech, it's the math of the territory. A huge country with different climates, massive distances, and landscapes that change how people live. And over time, that turns into accents, food, houses, routines. It becomes identity. Think about the basics. Climate determines what feels comfortable, what spoils, what lasts, what you can plant in your backyard, what you cook to make it through the day. Where it's humid and hot, food tends to be fresher, more connected to rivers and the sea, with fruit, fish, broths, and seasonings that wake up the body. Where the air is drier and the heat tightens its grip, solutions show up that look simple but are genius. Preserving, salting, drying, using hardy ingredients, turning scarcity into a cuisine full of technique. The same cassava becomes 1,000 different things depending on the place. And that isn't an accident, it's adaptation. Distance changes everything too. For a long time, traveling within Brazil wasn't just get on the highway and go. It was crossing mountain ranges, rivers, fields, stretches of forest, entire regions without easy connection. That makes communities develop their own ways of speaking, playing, building, and organizing. It's as if the territory created natural, cultural bubbles, which later meet, mix, and become something else. And then comes the contrast you can feel on your skin. The coast and the interior tell different stories. The coast, more connected by the sea, tends to receive influence, mixing, and circulation earlier. The interior, many times, grows at the pace of the possible route, following rivers, valleys, trails. Just look at the São Francisco River, and you'll understand how a line of water can become a reference for life, movement, and encounters across generations. Now put that on the country's mental map. The humid north, with wide rivers and dense forest, calls for different houses, different clothes, a different pace of life. The semi-arid region teaches economy of movement, reading the seasons, respect for every change in the sky. The open fields of the south have a different rhythm of wind, temperature, horizon, and even the way people occupy the land changes. Meanwhile, the more urban southeast concentrates encounters between people from the entire country, and that mix speeds up customs, slang, and styles like a cultural blender on high speed. And here comes the line that's a joke, but it's true. In Brazil, even good morning changes with latitude. The intonation changes, the speed changes, the word changes, the smile changes. And that isn't random difference. It's the territory working over time, shaping people, and then bringing those people together in the same country, as if Brazil were a collection of worlds that learn to live together on the same map. Now, real quick, let me open the toolbox, because if you want to talk about Brazil with geography and history without falling into myth, you need method. It isn't about memorizing dates, it's about proving what you're saying with the map itself. First tool, layered maps. A 3D globe with satellite imagery, like Google Earth, gives you a superpower. You understand the terrain with your eyes. Turn elevation on and off, zoom in, measure distance, follow a river, look at a mountain range as if you're flying over it. And here's the trick. Every time you come across a city, ask, why here? Is it in a valley, near a bay, at a pass between mountain ranges? The answer is almost always in the terrain and the water. Second tool, physical and thematic maps, especially relief and hydrography. They're the country's X-ray. On a regular map, everything looks flat. On an elevation map, you see the invisible walls. On a river map, you see the old highways. And if you want an official, well-organized source, you can use materials from IBGE when the topic is territory and geographic classification. Third tool, a simple timeline. At most 8 milestones. It sounds like too little, but that's exactly why it works. Instead of trying to tell everything, you choose the moments that change the mental map. Before contact, arrival by the coast, expansion inland, formation of key cities, and so on. If you go past 8, it turns into an encyclopedia, and an encyclopedia won't hold an audience. Fourth tool, ruthless fact-checking. Golden rule. If you can't confirm it in 2 reliable sources, it doesn't go in. If it's a data point, you confirm it in 2 independent sources. If it's a story that sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Halapao. What it is. Golden dunes, crystal clear rivers, plateaus, and a cerrado that looks like wild movie scenery. Why it exists. The sand comes from worn-down rocks and is carried and redeposited by natural processes. The terrain opens corridors and broad plateaus, and the water shows up in crystal-clear springs. Surprise curiosity, the ferveduros. You get in and you don't sink. Water bubbles up from the ground with so much pressure that it pushes your body upward, like the place has its own law of gravity. It's the weirdest, most fun feeling. You try to sink and Halapao pushes you right back up. And the technique that ties everything together. Always connect place to event to visible consequence today. Place, steep mountain range. Event, routes forced to pass through a certain valley. Consequence today, cities and roads still follow that layout. When you do that, the audience feels like they're not hearing random trivia, they're watching the country work. And that's it. With these tools, geography becomes evidence, and history becomes a movie. Stamp on the map, 6 stops, 6 different "how does this exist" moments. And in all of them, the rule is the same. First, nature builds the stage. Then, human history learns how to live on it. Iguazu Falls. What it is. A wall of water in dozens of drops with a roar you feel in your chest. Why it exists. There, the river hits rock steps and elevation breaks that have been carved by erosion over time, opening cracks and plunges. Surprise curiosity. It isn't a single waterfall, it's a huge system, and the most dramatic point looks like a natural amphitheater, as if the water picked a stage to make noise. And all of it happens right on the border with Argentina, like the landscape doesn't care much about lines on a map. Lençóis Maranhenses. What it is. Endless white dunes with bluish lagoons between them. It looks edited, but it's real. Why it exists. Wind and sand work like a sculptor, piling up dunes, and rain does the rest, filling depressions where water stays pooled for a while. Surprise curiosity. Despite the desert look, it isn't a desert. It's a place that gets a lot of rain during part of the year. That's why the lagoons appear and disappear, like the set changes outfits by season. You come back months later and the map on the ground has already changed. Chapada Diamantina. What it is. A set of mountain ranges, valleys, canyons, caves, and waterfalls that look like an adventure movie set. Why it exists. There, time acted like a patient sculptor. Ancient rocks were cut by water and wind, creating cliffs, plateaus, and deep fissures. Surprise curiosity. The name isn't random. The region was marked by cycles of mineral prospecting in the past, and that left human traces across the territory. But what surprises people most is how light changes the landscape. In certain pools and caves, the water seems to glow from within, like someone put a spotlight on the bottom. Fernando de Noronha. What it is. An archipelago in the Atlantic with cliffs, coves, and water so clear it looks like a filter. Why it exists. It's a piece of geologic history rising outside the continent. Volcanic rock that formed islands and reefs, creating shelter for marine life. Surprise curiosity. Beyond being beautiful, the place works like a natural nursery. It's common to see sea turtles and dolphins on almost fixed routes, as if the island were a scheduled meeting point in the ocean. And the terrain creates natural lookout points that feel like they were planned by a movie director. Every turn reveals a different postcard view. Meeting of the waters. What it is: two rivers running side by side without mixing, forming a visible line in the water. Why it exists. The Rio Negro and the Solimoes River have different temperatures, speeds, and densities, and that makes them take time to truly merge. Surprise curiosity. You can see the seam of the meeting for miles, as if someone ran a brush through the water to split the colors. It's a perfect reminder that, in Brazil, even the water has personality. 6 places, 6 proofs that Brazil isn't just a setting. It's a landscape factory, and each landscape forces a different way of living, traveling, building, and telling history. Today we didn't travel through Brazil the traditional way, we traveled through the map. We saw that the biomes are living chapters, a forest that creates its own climate, a cerrado with underground secrets, a semi-arid region that comes back to life, a pantanal that pulses, grasslands that look simple but are complex. We saw that the terrain is a silent screenwriter. Mountain ranges become invisible walls, plateaus become possible paths, rivers become roads, and sometimes traps. And we saw how all of that turns into history in the shape of cities, places that were born where the landscape allowed and grew the way the ground permitted. In the end, Brazil makes more sense when you stop looking only at names and start looking at shapes. Because here, the territory isn't scenery, it's destiny. And keep this line: if you understood the map, you understood Brazil. Now tell me, which region of Brazil do you want to see in the next episode, and why?